All right, now let's discuss this. We are now joined via Zoom by Tshepo Matseba, Managing Director of Reputation First. Thank you so much for your time, Tshepo, this afternoon. Well, I think most South Africans, appreciate Mr. Khumalo's explanation that money invested in tourism is for just that, and also how important investing in tourism benefits the economy. I think what most people are struggling to understand is how 1 billion rand to sponsor an international soccer club at a time when the country is dealing with an energy crisis, high crime levels, high fuel and food costs, food security, for example, and fundamentally a leadership deficit. How that can possibly make this deal acceptable right now. I'm wondering what your take is.
Yeah, good afternoon, Nati, and thank you for inviting us. The CEO is probably right on a few dimensions, that there's an allocation for different portfolios of government, and that allocation for tourism would perform tourism-related activities. But this kind of allocations across the board happen within a context, and context is everything. So if you look at South Africa as a context today and right now, you have a serious macroeconomic challenges, including the critical energy crisis that is well spoken about globally. And now it would be tone deaf and insensitive to say that we can ignore all the other factors and just talk about tourism, and this 1 billion or investment of this amount would have been spent anyway, and so let us proceed as if nothing else has changed. Under normal circumstances, the proposition, if we get access to actually analyze it and read it, it may be wise, it may be decent in terms of marketing and communication and promoting South Africa as a tourism destination in those markets. But under the circumstances, it may not necessarily be a wise idea, and that's because of a few dimensions. In fact, the Tourism Business Council tells us that South Africa is actually well promoted and well understood and well known as a proposition around the world, but in particular in the United Kingdom. And therefore that the growth markets that we should be looking at are different from what we are being told by SA Tourism. In fact, growth markets that SA Business Council is talking about is that those SA Tourism Business Council is talking about is that those markets are in markets such as China and India, where there is a unique opportunity that, if tapped properly, could help us to reach our targets by 2030 of accepting X amount of visitors around South Africa. And so while the techniques that the CEO is talking about and SA Tourism is talking about may be right, and at a technical level in terms of how they interpret their version of return on investment at this particular point and this particular juncture, this may not necessarily be the right thing to do. Note that South Africa comes on the back of that very successful World Cup where the country was promoted globally in the context of football. So we actually can argue that that investment has been exhausted, and we therefore need to be looking at different initiatives. And one of the questions I would ask is, SA Tourism, what are the initiatives that you are taking directly as an organization to help sustain the businesses that are currently promoting tourism in SA and around the world, and the companies, some of them that really nearly faced closure during COVID-19 over the past 18 months to 24 months.
So, Tshepo, after having listened, to Mr. Khumalo, would you say then, such a sponsorship deal would benefit South Africa in terms of international tourism? Also, just given how currently the local tourism sector has been impacted, one wonders, should this sponsorship deal then, of course, attract that international clientele to this country? Would it be an optimal time for it, to come in? Or is there something else that is being done on a local perspective to make sure that with that return on investment in terms of the influx, that we are ready?
Yeah, one of the issues that we look at in reputation management is something around consistency and whether you can sustain the type of initiatives that you recommend. And in this specific instance, it is not necessarily the right time, as I say, in terms of the economic environment that we are in, the far more pressing challenges South Africa is facing. A sponsorship deal of this nature may not necessarily yield the results that we're talking about. There are already, in any case, an influx of travelers from the UK who are coming into South Africa for different reasons, and they are repeat travelers. Research shows that people who come here from the United Kingdom are mostly repeat travelers, and so that tells you already that that market, we own it. We just need to defend it and continue to tell the positive stories, and there are many ways of telling the story beyond just sponsoring a team with an amount of this magnitude. There are various other opportunities. There's various digital platforms and digital engagement and communication platforms that we can actually use to drive the message without necessarily spending this much. Importantly, remember that it's easy in the world of marketing to actually claim victories for the work that you actually didn't do. There are many other partners in the tourism tech sector, private entities that are spending a lot of money to promote South Africa internationally themselves with their own budgets to raise the amount of travelers on their books and make a sufficient sort of profit. And in that process, South Africa as a whole gains. And so for us to now say that all the visitors that come into the country come because we take initiatives as a tourism and we spend X amount of money and all of the visitors are accounted for by one institution would really honestly be misleading. The truth right now that we face is that the greater opportunities to collaborate with the entrepreneurs, medium and to big size businesses in South Africa and around the world who are pro-South Africa, because the role of intermediaries can actually help us fast track the flow of travel from both international and domestic travelers. And importantly, the other market that we are missing is the African continent that we don't talk about very often. And so the idea that this is the big deal and this is something that we should prioritize at the moment is probably misleading. The context that we are in is probably not correct and not right now, perhaps to do this type of an arrangement. If things were different and the economic circumstances were completely different, it could probably be something to consider.
Yeah, Tshepo, let me squeeze in last question. And I mean, just to your point, having said all of the things that could possibly benefit us and just talking about the timing, the timing is what is the issue here in terms of where South Africans are at loggerheads, I would imagine, with SA tourism. So the lesson then is, we should be meeting each other. We should be knowing what South African tourism is spending its money on. So how then would you advise, the South African tourism, on selling South Africa abroad and also bringing its people closer to what it is that it's doing?
Well, the first thing is to sort out the internal dynamics that the organization is facing. So you need a stable management team. At the moment, you have an acting CEO, an acting CFO, and various other acting roles. And that tells you about the level of stability of the organization. Secondly, is to invest effort deliberately in stakeholder engagement. And the CEO said this himself, that they didn't make it, the acting CEO, that he said that they didn't do enough to engage stakeholders in advance. And that's why this leakage is catching them off guard. So part of the work is to talk to the locals and get the domestic market and its sentiment right, because once the domestic market and sentiment is right, it makes it easier for us to host our guests and to entertain them. And then lastly, I think this discussion about untapped markets or potential growth markets is very, very important for us to go and invest money in a place where we have strength. and where we are strong, as if we are unknown, as if we are a country somewhere in the corner of the world that is completely unknown, would be a misfit. The opportunity is honestly to go into those growth markets such as China and India. And perhaps there might be a soft message that I would send to this specific team to be a bit more humble and to speak to South Africans with a degree of humility, because it's that humility that will demonstrate that as an organization and as a country, we are committed to our country first, and then we are committed to selling a proposition that's compelling, but also that has a lot of humility, because we are indeed truly about Ubuntu.
Thank you so much, Tshepo Matseba, there for your time. Of course, he is the Managing Director of Reputation First.